Your mom doesn't fit the brand anymore. Those words cut through my heart like a knife through warm butter, spoken by my own daughter-in-law about me, the woman who had given everything for this family. I never thought my own son would let someone erase me from my own kitchen. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel that this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe, because this story might help someone draw closer to God's love. Amen. My name is Karen Ellis, and at 66 years old, I thought I had learned all of life's lessons. I live in Fresno, California, where the summer heat bakes the sidewalks and the smell of fresh tortillas fills the air on every corner. For 38 years, I wore the same faded blue apron, the one with tiny burn marks from years of standing over hot comals, making tamales before dawn broke over Belmont Avenue. Every morning at 4:30, I would slip out of bed quietly, careful not to wake my late husband's memory that still seemed to linger in our small apartment above what used to be our restaurant. I'd wrap my graying hair in the same net I'd used for decades, pin my grandmother's small silver cross to my apron strap, and begin preparing masa with hands that knew the recipe by heart, not from any cookbook, but from generations of women who had passed down their love through corn flour and patience. The restaurant wasn't much to look at from the outside. Peeling paint on adobe walls, a hand-painted sign that read, Ellis Family Kitchen, in letters I had carefully brushed myself 20 years ago. But inside, it was filled with the warmth that only comes from feeding people with genuine love. Regular customers knew to save room for my sweet corn cake, and on Sundays after church, families would line up for my famous mole that took 3 days to prepare properly. I raised my son Jacob there, in that kitchen, teaching him to fold tamales while he did his homework at the prep counter. When his father passed away from cancer 8 years ago, I didn't close the restaurant. I couldn't. This place was our legacy. Our love story written in recipes and served on heavy ceramic plates that had witnessed thousands of family celebrations. Jacob grew up and married Vanessa, a polished woman from Sacramento with perfectly manicured nails and business ideas that seemed to sparkle like her diamond engagement ring. At first, I was overjoyed. My son had found love, and I welcomed her into our family with open arms and extra helpings of everything she claimed to enjoy. Mom, we want to help expand the business, Jacob told me one Tuesday evening as I was cleaning the grill. Vanessa has some amazing ideas about branding and marketing. She thinks we could really take this to the next level. I remember feeling such pride swell in my chest. My boy, wanting to carry on the family tradition, wanting to honor what his father and I had built with our own hands and hearts. When he asked to put the restaurant officially under his name for tax purposes and to secure business loans, I signed those papers without hesitation. I built this for you, mijo, I told him, using the same endearment I'd whispered when he had nightmares as a child. But that Tuesday evening conversation was 3 months ago. 3 months that feel like 3 lifetimes now. The changes started small. Vanessa suggested we modernize the menu, replacing my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards with laminated sheets that listed ingredients she'd researched online. She hired a graphic designer to create a new logo. Sleek, minimalist, nothing like the warm family crest I'd painted by hand. We need a fresh image, Karen, she'd say, always using my first name instead of Mom, like she used to. This isn't the 1990s anymore. She brought in new staff, young servers who didn't know that Mrs. Rodriguez preferred extra cilantro in her pozole, or that the Martinez family always ordered 3 extra tortillas because their youngest was going through a growth spurt. These new employees looked right through me when I tried to explain the small touches that made our customers feel like family rather than just transactions. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was in my usual spot, folding napkins while the breakfast rush died down, when I heard Vanessa's voice drifting through the thin walls of the office. She was on the phone, her tone businesslike and cold. We need to make some personnel changes, she was saying. The elderly woman in the kitchen, she doesn't fit our new brand direction. The restaurant needs a younger, more modern face if we're going to attract the demographic we're targeting. My hands stopped folding. The napkin crumpled between my fingers as the words hit me like a physical blow. The elderly woman, she was talking about me, about the woman who had poured her soul into every meal, who had stayed up all night when Jacob was sick as a baby, working double shifts to pay for his medicine. I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I know she's family, Vanessa continued, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. We can keep her for prep work in the back where customers can't see her. But honestly, Jacob, your mother is becoming a liability. Her old-fashioned cooking methods are slowing us down, and frankly, she makes the place look dated. The silence that followed was deafening. My son, my precious boy who I had rocked to sleep, who I had cheered for at every soccer game, who I had worked 3 jobs to put through business school, said nothing, not one word in my defense. "You're right," he finally whispered. So quietly I almost missed it. "We'll figure out how to handle it." I stumbled backward from the door, my hand flying to the silver cross at my throat. The same cross my grandmother had given me when I married Jacob's father. The same cross I touched every time I prayed for my family's happiness and prosperity. The napkins scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, and I felt something inside my chest crack wide open. That evening, I knelt beside my bed as I had every night for 66 years, my arthritic knees pressing into the worn carpet. But for the first time in my life, the words wouldn't come. I held my rosary beads, feeling each smooth surface between my trembling fingers. But my prayers felt like they were hitting the ceiling and falling back down on my shoulders like stones. "Jesus," I whispered into the darkness, "please show me what I've done wrong. Show me how to fix this family that's breaking apart." But the silence felt absolute, as if even heaven had turned its back on the elderly woman who no longer fit the brand. The morning after I heard those devastating words, I woke before my alarm as always, but this time my pillow was damp with tears I didn't remember shedding. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, aged overnight by the weight of betrayal. I touched the silver cross at my throat and whispered, "Give me strength, Lord," before beginning another day in the kitchen that was slowly being taken from me. As I prepared the morning's masa, my hands moved through the familiar motions, while my mind wandered to all the sacrifices I had made for this family. Sacrifices that apparently meant nothing now. I remembered when Jacob was 7 years old and came down with pneumonia. The medical bills were crushing. My husband's construction job provided basic insurance, but not enough to cover the specialist visits and prescription medications our boy needed. Without hesitation, I sold my grandmother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned, to pay for his treatment. I never told Jacob about that ring. I never told him that while he recovered, I worked 17-hour days at the restaurant and took on weekend catering jobs, surviving on 3 hours of sleep and endless prayers. "Por favor, Dios," I used to whisper while stirring pozole at 2 a.m. "Don't let me lose him. I'll give you anything, everything. Just let my boy live." And God heard me. Jacob recovered completely, grew strong, went to college on a scholarship I helped him research and apply for during those same sleepless nights. When he graduated with his business degree, I threw him a party at the restaurant that cost me 3 months' worth of savings. I invited everyone, his friends, our customers, people from church who had watched him grow up. I made his favorite mole poblano from scratch, spending 2 days preparing it because I wanted everything to be perfect for my boy's celebration. That night, watching him laugh with his friends, I felt such deep gratitude to God for allowing me to see this moment. "Thank you, Jesus," I prayed silently while cleaning up long after midnight, "for letting me give him everything he needed to succeed." But now, standing in the same kitchen where I had celebrated his achievements, I wondered if my love had somehow become a burden to him. The memories continued flooding back as I worked. When Jacob first brought Vanessa home to meet me, I had been so nervous. I spent 3 days cleaning the apartment above the restaurant, bought new curtains with money I couldn't really spare, and prepared a feast that could have fed 20 people. I wanted her to see that we might not be wealthy, but we were rich in love and tradition. "Mrs. Ellis," Vanessa had said that first evening, delicately picking at the enchiladas I had made with extra care, "this is all so authentic. Jacob has told me so much about your family recipes." I beamed with pride, mistaking her polite distance for shyness. Over the following months, I tried everything to make her feel welcome. I taught her to make my abuela's tamales, patiently guiding her hands through the process of spreading masa and folding corn husks. When she complained that the work was too messy, I laughed and told her about how my grandmother used to say that the best cooks always had a little masa under their fingernails. When they got engaged, I gave Vanessa my own engagement ring, a simple gold band with a tiny diamond that my husband had saved for months to buy. This belonged to Jacob's grandmother, I told her, sliding it onto her finger. She would have wanted you to have it. Vanessa accepted it graciously, but I noticed she only wore it to family gatherings, preferring the more expensive ring Jacob had bought her. During their wedding planning, I contributed every dollar I could spare. I paid for the flowers, the cake, and the venue decorations. When Vanessa mentioned wanting a destination honeymoon but worrying about the cost, I quietly took out a small loan against the restaurant to give them the money as a wedding gift. They spent 2 weeks in Hawaii while I worked double shifts to make the loan payments. God, I prayed each night during their honeymoon. Bless their marriage. Help them build something beautiful together. Now I realized that what they had built was a plan to erase me from the picture. As the morning progressed and customers began arriving for breakfast, I watched Jacob and Vanessa work together with an efficiency that excluded me completely. They had developed their own system, their own language of glances and gestures that made me feel like an outsider in my own kitchen. When Mrs. Gonzalez, one of our oldest customers, asked for me specifically to prepare her husband's memorial lunch, Vanessa intercepted. "Karen is busy with prep work," she told Mrs. Gonzalez smoothly. "I'll be handling all special requests from now on. I'm sure you'll find our service just as good." Mrs. Gonzalez looked confused and a little hurt. She had been coming to our restaurant for 15 years, ever since her family moved to Fresno. I had cooked for her daughter's quinceañera, her son's graduation party, and countless other celebrations. When her husband was diagnosed with cancer, I had prepared special broths and soft foods that he could keep down during chemotherapy, never charging her a penny for the extra care those meals required. "But I wanted to talk to Karen about Miguel's favorite dishes," Mrs. Gonzalez said, her voice uncertain. "She knows exactly how he liked his mole prepared." "I have all the recipes now," Vanessa replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything will be perfect, I promise." I wanted to step forward, to reassure Mrs. Gonzalez that I would personally handle her husband's memorial lunch. But Jacob caught my eye and shook his head slightly. The message was clear. Stay in your place. That afternoon, when the lunch rush ended and the kitchen was quiet, I found myself alone with my thoughts and my growing despair. I pulled out my worn Bible, the same one my mother had given me when I was confirmed at 16, and turned to Psalm 27, my favorite passage during difficult times. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. "The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" But for the first time in my life, those words felt hollow. I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything I had worked for. Afraid of being forgotten by the son I had raised with such love. Afraid that maybe God wasn't listening to the prayers of an old woman who had outlived her usefulness. I remembered all the times I had prayed for others in this very kitchen. When young Maria from church lost her job, I prayed while preparing food to take to her family. When the Ramirez baby was born premature, I lit candles and said novenas while kneading bread to take to the hospital. I had always believed that God worked through my hands, that every meal I prepared was a small act of love that He used to bless others. Am I being tested or just forgotten? I whispered to the empty kitchen, the question hanging in the air like the lingering smell of cumin and cilantro. That evening, as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my knees aching from another day on my feet, I heard Jacob and Vanessa talking in low voices below. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught fragments. Transition period. New direction. Difficult conversation. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the small framed photo of Jacob's first communion. He was 8 years old in the picture, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing the white suit I had saved for months to buy. I had been so proud that day, watching him receive the Eucharist for the first time, knowing that I had raised him in the faith despite all our struggles. "Jesus," I prayed, pressing the photo to my chest. "I don't understand why this is happening. I've tried to live according to your word. I've tried to love them the way you love us, unconditionally, sacrificially, but I feel so lost, so forgotten. The tears came then, hot and bitter, falling onto the glass that protected my son's innocent smile. I cried for all the years of sacrifice that seemed to mean nothing, for the love that had somehow become a burden, for the faith that felt shaken to its very foundation. Outside my window, the neon sign of the restaurant flickered against the darkness, Ellis Family Kitchen, and I wondered how much longer that name would remain before it, too, was erased and replaced with something more modern, more marketable, more suitable for their brand. I fell asleep that night clutching my rosary, but even the familiar prayers felt like words spoken into an empty well, echoing back with no response from the God I had served faithfully for 66 years. 3 weeks passed after that overheard conversation, and each day brought fresh humiliations so subtle that anyone watching might have missed them. But I felt every single one like paper cuts to my soul. It started with my schedule. For 38 years, I had opened the restaurant at 5:30 in the morning, unlocking the doors with keys that had worn smooth in my palm. But suddenly, Vanessa appeared one morning at 5:15, already inside, coffee brewing, prep stations organized according to her new system. "Oh, Karen," she said without looking up from her clipboard, "we've adjusted the opening routine. Jacob and I will handle the morning setup from now on. You can come in at 7 for the breakfast prep." 7 o'clock. 2.5 hours later than I had been arriving for nearly 4 decades. 2.5 hours of someone else determining how my kitchen should be prepared, what needed to be done first, which ingredients to prioritize. I stood there in my coat, keys dangling uselessly from my fingers, feeling like a stranger trying to enter my own home. "But the masa needs time to rest properly," I said quietly, "and the beans have to soak overnight." "We've got it handled," Vanessa interrupted, finally glancing up with that polite smile that had become as familiar as it was painful. "We're implementing some efficiency improvements. Quality control, quality control." As if the food I had been preparing for decades was somehow substandard. As if the customers who had been coming here for years, bringing their children and grandchildren, had been settling for mediocre meals all this time. The next week, I arrived at my new time to find that my apron hooks had been moved to the back corner, near the dishwashing station. My special knives, the ones I had accumulated over the years, each one chosen for a specific purpose, had been relocated to a drawer marked miscellaneous equipment. Even my coffee mug, a simple ceramic cup with "World's Best Mom" painted in fading letters that Jacob had given me for Mother's Day years ago, had been relegated to the employee break room instead of its usual spot near the coffee machine. Small things, tiny adjustments that anyone else might have dismissed as simple reorganization, but each change whispered the same message: "You don't belong here anymore." The cruelest cut came on a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Delgado arrived with her granddaughter Sophia. Mrs. Delgado had been battling diabetes for 3 years, and I had developed a special recipe for her: low-sodium, reduced-sugar versions of her favorite dishes that still carried all the flavor and love of the originals. Sophia, who was 8 years old, always ordered my sweet corn cake, and I would sneak an extra piece into a container for her to take home. "Is Karen here?" Mrs. Delgado asked the new hostess, a 20-something girl with perfectly straight teeth and a smile that looked practiced in front of mirrors. "She usually prepares my special order. I'm sorry, but our kitchen staff doesn't take individual requests anymore," the hostess replied, consulting her tablet. "But our chef can accommodate dietary restrictions if you let me know what you need." Our chef. Vanessa was now our chef, while I, the woman who had created every recipe in this place, had become invisible kitchen staff. I watched from the prep station as Mrs. Delgado's face fell with confusion and disappointment. Sophia tugged at her grandmother's sleeve, asking in Spanish why they weren't sitting at their usual table, why Abuela Karen wasn't coming to say hello like she always did. "Está bien, mija," Mrs. Delgado whispered to her granddaughter, but I could see the hurt in her eyes as they were seated at a table by the window instead of the corner booth where I used to stop by to chat about Sophia's school projects and Mrs. Delgado's garden. I wanted to go to them, to explain that I was still here, still able to prepare her special meals with the same care I always had, but Jacob appeared at my elbow. "Mom, you need to focus on the prep work," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. Let the front of house handle the customers. The front of house. As if I hadn't been the heart and soul of both the front and back of house for decades. As if I hadn't known these customers' names, their favorite dishes, their family stories, their struggles and celebrations. That night, I attended my weekly Bible study at St. Mary's Catholic Church, where I had been a member for 42 years. Usually, these gatherings brought me comfort, a chance to discuss scripture with other women of faith, to share prayer requests and find strength in community. But even there, I felt the growing weight of my isolation. "How's the restaurant, Karen?" asked Patricia Morales, whose daughter's wedding reception I had catered 2 years ago. "My friend Linda said she stopped by last week but didn't see you." "It's changing," I said carefully, not wanting to burden these good women with my family troubles. "Jacob and his wife are taking on more responsibilities." "That's wonderful," said Margaret Chen, who had been in my Bible study group for 15 years. "You must be so proud to see him carrying on the family tradition." I nodded and smiled, but inside I felt hollow. How could I explain that the family tradition was being systematically dismantled? How could I tell these women who looked up to me as a successful businesswoman and devoted mother that my own son was allowing his wife to erase me from the very life I had built with my own hands? "Let's pray for our families tonight," suggested our group leader, Sister Maria, a gentle nun in her 70s who had guided our discussions for years, "for the wisdom to support our children while also maintaining our own dignity and purpose." As we joined hands in our prayer circle, I felt the familiar comfort of faith community surrounding me. But when it came time to voice our individual prayer requests, I couldn't bring myself to speak the truth that was eating away at my heart. "Please pray for transitions," I said finally, "for wisdom in knowing when to step back and when to stand firm." After the meeting, as I drove home through the familiar streets of Fresno, I passed the restaurant and saw lights still on in the office. Jacob and Vanessa were working late again, probably planning more changes, more improvements, more ways to modernize and streamline what they saw as an outdated operation. I pulled into the alley behind the building and sat in my car, watching the warm glow from the office window. Through the glass, I could see them leaning over papers spread across the desk. My desk, where I had paid bills and planned menus and worried over finances for decades. They looked like any young couple building their future together. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of the pride I used to feel watching Jacob work. But then Vanessa laughed at something, and the sound carried through the night air with a casual joy that reminded me how completely I had been excluded from their plans, their dreams, their version of the family business. I thought about going inside, about knocking on the office door and asking to see whatever they were working on. I was still, technically, part of this business. My name was still on some of the old paperwork, even if it was being systematically removed from everything else. Instead, I drove home to my empty apartment and made myself a cup of tea with honey, the way my mother used to prepare it when I was a child and feeling sad. I sat at my small kitchen table, looking at the framed photographs that covered the surface. Pictures of Jacob at every stage of his life, family gatherings at the restaurant, moments of joy and celebration that now felt like artifacts from someone else's existence. My Bible lay open beside my teacup, turned to the Book of Job. I had been reading it every night, searching for understanding of why faithful people sometimes suffer, why God allows the righteous to be tested beyond their apparent ability to endure. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him," I read aloud to my empty kitchen. But the words felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I was still learning to speak. I picked up my phone to call Jacob, my finger hovering over his contact information. We used to talk every day, sharing small details about the restaurant, about customers, about life. When was the last time he had called me just to talk? When was the last time he had asked for my advice, my opinion, my blessing on a decision? I set the phone down without dialing. What would I say? That I felt invisible in my own life? That I was slowly being erased from the business I had built with love and sacrifice? That I didn't recognize the son I had raised to be kind and loyal and respectful? That night, I dreamed of my grandmother's kitchen in Mexico, where I had learned to cook as a little girl. In the dream, she was still alive, still teaching me to grind corn for masa, still telling me stories about the importance of feeding people with love instead of just filling their stomachs. "Mija," she said in the dream, her weathered hands guiding mine as we worked. "Sometimes the people we love most forget where they came from. But love doesn't disappear just because it's not appreciated. It transforms into something stronger." I woke before dawn with tears on my cheeks and a strange sense that something was about to change. Whether that change would bring redemption or complete destruction, I couldn't tell. But I could feel it coming like a storm gathering on the horizon, and all I could do was pray for the strength to weather whatever was about to break over my life. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon that had started like any other. I was in the back kitchen, quietly preparing vegetables for the evening service, when I heard unfamiliar voices in the dining room. Through the service window, I could see a group of well-dressed people with notebooks and cameras, food critics and bloggers, the kind who could make or destroy a restaurant's reputation with a single review. Jacob was leading them on a tour, his voice animated with pride as he explained the restaurant's evolution and modern approach to traditional cuisine. Vanessa stood beside him, radiant in a new dress that probably cost more than I made in a week, fielding questions about their innovative menu and their vision for elevating Mexican-American fusion cuisine. "We've completely reimagined the dining experience," Vanessa explained to a woman with an expensive camera. "Gone are the outdated, heavy dishes of the past. We're focusing on fresh, contemporary interpretations that speak to today's sophisticated palate." Outdated, heavy. She was describing my grandmother's recipes, my mother's techniques, the food that had sustained this community for decades, the same dishes that had paid for Jacob's education, Vanessa's engagement ring, their Hawaii honeymoon, and countless other expenses they had never questioned when they needed my financial support. I watched, invisible behind the service window, as they posed for photographs in front of the wall where my family pictures used to hang. Those photographs, images of 3 generations of women who had poured their souls into this kitchen, had been replaced with modern art prints that looked like they came from a hotel chain. "And who developed these new recipes?" asked a food blogger, a young man with thick-rimmed glasses who was typing notes into his phone. "Vanessa is our head chef and creative director," Jacob replied without hesitation. "She trained at the California Culinary Academy and has completely transformed our menu with her innovative approach." I gripped the edge of the prep counter so tightly my knuckles went white. Vanessa had spent exactly 3 weeks in a community college cooking class 2 years ago, hardly the California Culinary Academy credentials she was claiming. More painfully, every single innovative dish she was describing was based on recipes I had taught her, modified just enough to seem original, but rooted in techniques I had learned from women who never had the luxury of formal culinary education. "We're particularly proud of our signature mole," Vanessa continued, gesturing toward a plate being presented by one of the new servers. "It's a family recipe that's been passed down for generations, but I've refined it with contemporary techniques to create something truly special." A family recipe. She was claiming my grandmother's mole as her own family tradition, the same recipe I had spent 3 days teaching her to prepare when she first joined our family. The same recipe that had taken me 30 years to perfect, learning from my abuela's gentle corrections and patient guidance. One of the critics took a bite and closed his eyes in appreciation. "This is extraordinary. The depth of flavor, the complexity. How long does this take to prepare?" 3 days from start to finish, Vanessa said with practiced confidence. "It's a labor of love that requires real dedication to authentic technique." Authentic technique. I had been making that mole for 40 years, and she had learned it from me 6 months ago. Yet here she was, accepting praise for my knowledge, my skill, my cultural heritage as if it had always belonged to her. The tour moved to the kitchen, and I found myself face to face with these strangers who were documenting what they believed to be Vanessa's success story. Jacob introduced me with a casual wave of his hand. "This is Karen, one of our kitchen staff. She helps with prep work." One of our kitchen staff. The words hit me like a physical slap. Not my mother who built this restaurant from nothing. Not the woman who created every recipe you just tasted. Not even Karen Ellis, whose name is still painted on the sign outside. Just kitchen staff. Hired help. A warm body to chop vegetables and wash dishes. "How long have you worked here?" asked the food blogger, barely glancing up from his phone. Before I could answer, Vanessa smoothly interjected. We've recently upgraded our entire kitchen operation. Fresh perspectives, modern efficiency standards. It's made such a difference in our output quality. The implication was clear. I was part of the old inferior system that had been improved by their arrival. The blogger nodded and moved on, already losing interest in the anonymous prep cook who wasn't worth including in their story about the restaurant's transformation. That evening, after the critics had left and the dinner rush had ended, I finally confronted Jacob. I found him in the office, updating the social media accounts that now featured professional photographs of Vanessa posing with her dishes. Mijo, I said quietly, standing in the doorway like a visitor asking permission to enter my own space. We need to talk. He looked up from the computer, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of what he had allowed to happen. But then his expression hardened into the same professional politeness he used with difficult customers. What's up, Mom? I'm pretty busy updating our online presence. The visit from the food critics was amazing. We might get featured in California Food and Wine. Jacob, I said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind me, and those people think Vanessa created all our recipes. They think she built this restaurant. They don't even know I exist. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. Mom, it's just marketing. People want to see young, dynamic leadership. It doesn't change anything about what you've contributed. What I've contributed? The words came out sharper than I intended. Jacob, I didn't contribute to this restaurant. I built it. I am this restaurant. Every dish they tasted today came from my hands, my knowledge, my family's traditions. And we appreciate that, he said. But his tone suggested the conversation was over. But Vanessa and I are taking the business in a new direction. We need to position ourselves for growth, for expansion. That requires a certain image. A certain image. I stared at my son, this man I had raised to value honesty and loyalty and respect for his elders. When had he learned to speak in corporate buzzwords? When had he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a liability to be managed? What about respect, Jacob? What about honoring the woman who sacrificed everything so you could have this opportunity? Mom, you're being dramatic. No one's asking you to leave. You can keep doing what you're doing. But Vanessa is the face of the restaurant now. That's just how it has to be. I felt something break inside my chest, not sharp like glass, but deep and fundamental, like the foundation of a building giving way. Would Jesus forgive this too? I whispered, more to myself than to him. Should I forgive again? Jacob's face flushed with irritation. Don't bring religion into this, Mom. This is business. Everything is religion, mijo. How we treat people, how we honor our commitments, how we show love and respect. It's all connected to our faith. You used to understand that. He turned back to the computer screen, dismissing me with his body language. I understand that we need to move forward, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions. I stood there for another moment, waiting for him to look at me, to show some sign of the boy who used to kneel beside me for bedtime prayers, who used to help me serve food to homeless families after church, who used to tell me I was the best cook in the world. But he kept typing, focused on creating an online presence that erased my existence while profiting from my life's work. Walking out of that office felt like leaving a funeral. I moved through the empty restaurant, past tables where I had celebrated countless birthdays and anniversaries with customers who had become family, past the kitchen where I had taught Jacob to crack eggs and fold empanadas, past the wall where our family photographs had hung for decades, now replaced with generic art that meant nothing to anyone. I stopped at the front door and looked back at the dining room one more time. In the morning, I would return and put on my apron and prepare food for people who would never know my name. I would work in the background while Vanessa accepted credit for my recipes, my techniques, my cultural heritage. I would smile and stay quiet while my own son introduced me as hired help in the business I had built with my own hands. But tonight, something had shifted inside me. As I stood in the doorway of Ellis Family Kitchen, a name that apparently meant nothing anymore, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't experienced in months. Anger. Not the hot, destructive kind of anger that burns everything it touches, but the cold, clear anger of someone who has finally seen the truth of her situation. The righteous anger of a woman who has given everything and received only contempt in return. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't go home and pray for patience or understanding or the strength to endure. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the restaurant that bore my family name while being run by people who acted as if I had never existed. God, I said aloud to the darkness, I've been asking you to help me accept this situation, but maybe you're waiting for me to stop accepting it. The idea felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For 66 years, I had been taught that good Christian women submit, endure, sacrifice, and forgive without limit. But what happened when submission became self-destruction? What happened when forgiveness enabled cruelty? What happened when love was met with such profound disrespect that continuing to offer it became a betrayal of my own dignity? As I drove home through the quiet streets of Fresno, I began to wonder if God was calling me not to endurance, but to action, not to silence, but to truth, not to endless forgiveness, but to the kind of love that sometimes requires saying no to protect what is sacred. Tomorrow would bring another day of invisible labor and unacknowledged contributions. But tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without crying. Instead, I slept with the strange peace that comes when you finally stop fighting against reality and start preparing to change it. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The sun was streaming through my bedroom window, and instead of the usual dread that accompanied each new day, I felt something I could only describe as divine determination. I knelt beside my bed as I had every morning for 66 years, but this time my prayer was different. Lord Jesus, I whispered, my hands folded over my worn Bible, show me how to honor the gifts you've given me. Show me how to stand up for truth without hatred in my heart. Give me wisdom to know when love requires boundaries. As I prepared for what I sensed would be a pivotal day, I made a decision that seemed small but felt monumental. I put on my favorite dress, the navy blue one with tiny white flowers that I usually saved for church. I braided my hair the way my grandmother used to wear hers, pinned my silver cross prominently at my throat, and for the first time in weeks, I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back at me. At the restaurant, I arrived at my usual time, not the later schedule Vanessa had imposed, but 5:30 in the morning. When the kitchen was quiet and full of possibility, I used my own key, the one I had carried for 38 years, and stepped into the space that still legally belonged to me, even if everyone had forgotten that fact. Instead of going straight to the prep station like a dutiful employee, I went to the office. I opened the filing cabinet that contained the restaurant's legal documents, papers I hadn't looked at since Jacob had asked me to sign them months ago. What I found made my heart pound with a mixture of vindication and righteous anger. My name was still on the business license. My signature was still on the lease. According to the legal documents, I was still a 50% owner of Ellis Family Kitchen, despite being treated like hired help who could be dismissed at will. Jacob was the other 50% owner, which meant any major decisions, like changing recipes, hiring and firing staff, or representing the restaurant to media, required my consent. Consent I had never given for any of the changes that had transformed my life's work into something unrecognizable. I carefully photographed each document with my phone, then returned everything to its proper place. As I worked, I heard voices outside. Jacob and Vanessa arriving early, probably to prepare for another day of claiming credit for my labor and legacy. Instead of hiding in the back kitchen as I had been doing, I walked out to meet them. They were standing near the hostess station, discussing the day's specials, when I approached with a calm confidence that seemed to surprise them both. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I'd like to talk to both of you about some changes I'll be implementing." Vanessa looked confused, as if she couldn't quite process the idea of me implementing anything. Jacob's expression was wary, the look of someone who sensed a shift in dynamics but couldn't yet identify the source. "Changes?" Vanessa asked, her voice carrying that familiar tone of polite condescension. "Karen, we've discussed this. All operational decisions go through me," I interrupted gently but firmly. "As the 50% owner of this establishment, All major decisions require my approval. I've been reviewing our legal documents this morning. The silence that followed was profound. I watched Jacob's face cycle through several emotions: surprise, recognition, and something that might have been fear. Vanessa looked from him to me and back again, clearly calculating how to regain control of a conversation that had suddenly shifted away from her. "Mom," Jacob said carefully, "you signed over—" "I signed papers making you a 50% owner," I corrected. "I never signed anything giving up my own ownership or decision-making authority. You can check with our lawyer if you'd like to verify that." Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "I can," I said, my voice still calm but carrying an authority I hadn't exercised in months. "And I am. Effective immediately, I'm resuming my role as head chef and co-owner. The media interviews, the recipe claims, the staff changes, all of that happened without my consent, which makes it legally questionable at best." "What are you saying?" Jacob asked, though I could see he already knew. "I'm saying that yesterday's food critic visit included false statements about who created our recipes and who owns this restaurant. That kind of misrepresentation could expose us to serious legal liability." It wasn't entirely true. I had no intention of pursuing legal action against my own son. But they didn't need to know that. What mattered was establishing that I wasn't the powerless victim they had been treating me as. Vanessa recovered her composure quickly, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "Karen, I think you're overreacting to what was simply a marketing strategy. Nobody intended to diminish your contributions." "My contributions," I repeated, tasting the inadequacy of the word. "Vanessa, let me be very clear about something. The mole recipe you claimed as your family tradition yesterday? That's my grandmother's recipe, passed down through 4 generations of women who never had the luxury of formal culinary training, but who understood that food is love made tangible. The techniques you described as your innovations? Those are methods I learned at my mother's side, perfected through 30 years of practice." "Well, technically," Vanessa said, her voice taking on the sharp edge it got when she felt challenged, "once you teach someone a recipe, it becomes part of their repertoire. That's how culinary traditions evolve." I looked at this woman who had married my son, who I had welcomed into my family with open arms and generous heart, who I had taught not just recipes but the stories behind them, the cultural significance, the spiritual dimension of feeding people with love. She was reducing all of that to intellectual property that could be claimed by whoever happened to be standing in front of the cameras. "You're right," I said quietly. "Culinary traditions do evolve, but they evolve through respect, acknowledgement, and honor, not through erasure and lies." Jacob stepped between us, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Mom, can we discuss this privately? We don't need to air family business in—" "Family business," I interrupted, feeling that divine determination surge stronger. "Yes, let's talk about family, Jacob. Let's talk about how family members treat each other. Let's talk about respect and gratitude and the commandment to honor your father and mother." His face flushed red. "Don't lecture me about commandments, Mom. This is about business, not religion. Everything is about faith, mijo. How we treat people, how we conduct our business, how we honor the gifts God has given us, it's all connected. You used to know that." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I had raised, the one who used to help me serve meals to homeless families after Sunday Mass, who understood that our restaurant was ministry as much as business. But then Vanessa placed her hand on his arm, and the moment passed. "Look," Vanessa said, her voice taking on a reasonable tone that I recognized as her manipulation strategy. "I think we all want the same thing here. A successful restaurant that honors tradition while embracing innovation. Maybe we can find a compromise that works for everyone. I'm not interested in compromises that require me to become invisible in my own life," I replied. "I'm interested in truth." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I took a break. I left the restaurant at 2:00 and drove to St. Mary's Catholic Church, where I found Father Martinez in his office, preparing for evening mass. "Karen," he said, looking up from his sermon notes with genuine warmth. "What a pleasant surprise. How are you, my child?" Father Martinez had been my pastor for 12 years, ever since he was assigned to St. Mary's as a young priest fresh from seminary. I had watched him grow into his calling, had provided food for countless church events, had sought his counsel during difficult times. If anyone would understand the spiritual dimensions of my current struggle, it would be him. "Father, I need guidance," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I'm facing a situation where I need to decide between keeping peace and speaking truth, between forgiveness and boundaries." He set aside his papers and gave me his full attention. "Tell me what's troubling you." I explained the situation as objectively as I could, trying not to let bitterness color my words. I told him about the systematic erasure of my contributions, the lies told to food critics, the way my own son had allowed me to be reduced to invisible kitchen help in the business I had built. And now, I concluded, I feel called to stand up for myself, to reclaim my place and my dignity, but I worry that I'm acting out of pride rather than righteousness. How do I know if this is God's will or my own wounded ego? Father Martinez was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Karen, do you remember the story of Jesus cleansing the temple? When he overturned the tables of the money changers?" I nodded. Jesus wasn't acting from anger or personal offense. He was acting from righteous indignation at seeing something sacred being profaned. Sometimes love requires us to defend what is holy, even when that defense disturbs the peace. But what about forgiveness? What about turning the other cheek? Forgiveness doesn't mean enabling sin, my child. Forgiveness doesn't require us to participate in our own destruction. Jesus forgave, yes, but he also spoke truth, even when that truth was uncomfortable. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. "I feel so lost, Father. I don't want to hurt my son, but I can't continue to watch everything I've built be stolen from me. Pray for wisdom," he said gently. "Pray for the strength to act from love rather than anger. But don't mistake submission for virtue when that submission enables cruelty." That evening, I returned home and sat at my kitchen table with my Bible open to the Book of Esther. I had always been drawn to her story, a woman who had to choose between safety and speaking truth, between keeping peace and saving her people. "If I perish, I perish," I read aloud, remembering Esther's words before she approached the king to defend her people. "But I cannot remain silent while something sacred is being destroyed." I spent the evening in prayer and preparation. I wrote down my thoughts, organized my legal documents, and planned what I would say the next day. Not in anger, but in truth. Not to destroy, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine and restore what had been profaned. For the first time in months, I went to sleep without the weight of victimhood pressing down on my chest. Instead, I slept with the peace that comes from finally accepting that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be treated with disrespect. Tomorrow, I would stop being the woman who endured everything silently. Tomorrow, I would become the woman who fought for truth with the strength that only comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. The next morning brought a fury I hadn't seen since Jacob was a teenager pushing boundaries. I arrived at the restaurant to find Vanessa pacing in the dining room like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid, agitated Spanish to someone who was clearly not giving her the answers she wanted to hear. "No, listen to me," she was saying, her voice sharp with desperation. "There has to be something. A loophole, an oversight, something that proves she signed away more than she thinks she did." I stood quietly in the doorway, understanding that she was talking to a lawyer, trying to find a way to legally strip me of the ownership rights I had asserted yesterday. When she saw me, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, ending the conversation. Then, turning to face me with a smile that looked more like a grimace, "Good morning, Karen. I was just handling some business matters." "I'm sure you were," I replied calmly, moving past her toward the kitchen. "Have you had a chance to review the ownership documents I mentioned yesterday?" Her composure cracked completely. "This is insane, Karen. You can't just waltz in here after months of doing what you're told and suddenly start making demands. That's not how businesses work." "You're right," I said, turning to face her fully. "That's not how businesses work. Businesses work according to legal contracts and ownership agreements, both of which happen to be on my side." Jacob emerged from the office, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was disheveled, His usual pressed shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a long night spent in difficult conversations. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "we need to talk. All of us. Like a family." "A family," I repeated, tasting the word that had been used as a weapon against me for months. "Yes, Jacob. Let's talk about family. Let's talk about honor and respect and gratitude." Vanessa's mask slipped entirely. Gratitude? For what? For holding us back with your outdated methods and embarrassing public behavior? For making us look unprofessional in front of important people? The words hung in the air like a slap. For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of shame that had been my constant companion for months. But then I remembered Father Martinez's words about righteous indignation, about defending what is sacred. "Embarrassing?" I said quietly. "Vanessa, let me tell you what's embarrassing. What's embarrassing is claiming someone else's cultural heritage as your own. What's embarrassing is lying to food critics about your qualifications and experience. What's embarrassing is treating the woman who built this restaurant like she's invisible. Built this restaurant?" Vanessa's voice rose to a near shout. "You call this success? You call running a tiny neighborhood joint that barely breaks even building something? Jacob and I are trying to create something important, something that matters in the real culinary world." "The real culinary world," I echoed. "You mean the world where lies matter more than truth? Where image matters more than substance? Where stealing someone's family recipes and claiming them as your own is considered acceptable business practice?" Jacob stepped between us, his hands raised like a referee trying to prevent a boxing match. "Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping anyone." I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be better than this, who was standing there acting as if both sides were equally wrong in this conflict. "Jacob, I have one question for you, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you believe that what's been happening here is right? Do you believe that I deserve to be erased from the business I built? To have my recipes stolen? To be introduced as kitchen staff to people reviewing my life's work?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, it's complicated. Business is complicated." "It's not complicated at all," I said firmly. "It's about right and wrong. It's about the commandment to honor your father and mother. It's about basic human decency." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. "There it is. The religious guilt trip. Honor thy mother. What about honoring the people who are actually trying to make something of this place? What about honoring your son's wife and her contributions?" "Your contributions?" I felt something shift inside me, a door closing on tolerance and opening on truth. "Vanessa, what exactly have you contributed besides lies and manipulation? You didn't invest a single dollar in this restaurant. You didn't spend 38 years building relationships with customers. You didn't sacrifice your health, your savings, your entire life to create something from nothing." "I brought vision," she shot back. "I brought modern business practices. I brought respectability." "You brought shame," I said quietly, and the words carried more weight than if I had shouted them. "You brought dishonor to everything this place represents." That's when she showed her true nature. The polite mask she had worn for months disappeared completely, revealing the calculating manipulator underneath. "You want to know the truth, Karen? The truth is that Jacob was embarrassed by you long before I came along. He used to complain about having to work in this pathetic little restaurant while his college friends got real jobs. He was ashamed of his mother, who never amounted to anything more than a neighborhood cook. The words were designed to destroy me, and for a moment they almost succeeded. I felt the familiar knife twist of inadequacy, the voice that had whispered in my ear for months telling me I wasn't good enough, successful enough, educated enough to deserve respect. But then I heard another voice, clearer and stronger, my grandmother's voice, speaking words she had taught me when I was a child learning to make tortillas in her kitchen. "Mija, remember that your worth doesn't come from what others think of you. Your worth comes from God, and from the love you put into the world." "You're lying," I said calmly, and something in my tone made both of them step back. "You're lying because you're desperate. You're lying because you know that without my recipes, my reputation, my 38 years of building this community trust, you have nothing but an empty shell of a restaurant with no soul." "We'll see about that," Vanessa snarled. We'll see how much your precious community loyalty is worth when they find out who you really are. What do you mean by that? Jacob asked, looking genuinely confused. Vanessa smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone playing their final card. I mean when they find out that their beloved Karen Ellis has been lying to them for decades. When they find out that Jacob isn't even her real son. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized she had discovered the one secret I had hoped would never matter. The one truth that I had protected for 32 years. That's right, she continued, her voice gaining strength from my shock. Jacob was abandoned at the hospital. No family, no background, nothing. Karen took him home like he was a stray dog and built her entire identity around being his devoted mother. But it's all fake. Their whole relationship is based on a lie. Jacob's face had gone white. What? What is she talking about, Mom? I looked at my son, the baby I had held in my arms when he was 3 days old and no one else wanted him. The boy I had raised with every ounce of love in my heart. The man who had been more truly mine than if I had given birth to him myself. And I made a choice. She's telling the truth, I said quietly. You were abandoned at Fresno General Hospital when you were 3 days old. No identification, no family, no one to claim you. And I took you home because the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be my son. Jacob staggered backward as if I had physically struck him. You lied to me? For 32 years? I protected you, I said, my voice breaking for the first time in this entire confrontation. I gave you a family, a home, unconditional love. I gave you everything I had to give. Built on a lie, Vanessa said triumphantly. Built on deception. And when people find out, when your precious customers find out that their St. Karen Ellis is nothing but a fraud, how much loyalty do you think you'll have then? I stood there in the ruins of my secret, watching my son process the revelation that was reshaping his understanding of his entire identity. Part of me wanted to collapse, to retreat, to accept that maybe I deserved this destruction because I had built our relationship on a foundation that could be called deceptive. But then I thought about that 3-day-old baby, abandoned and alone, and the young woman I had been who looked at him and saw not a burden or a charity case, but a gift from God. I thought about 32 years of midnight fevers and soccer games and homework help and proud graduation moments and love so fierce it had shaped both our lives. You're right, I said to Vanessa, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. I didn't give birth to Jacob, but I chose him. Every single day for 32 years, I chose to love him, to sacrifice for him, to build my life around his happiness and success. And if that's not real motherhood, then I don't know what is. I turned to Jacob, who was staring at me like I was a stranger. Mijo, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I want you to know that being your mother, chosen, not biological, has been the greatest honor of my life. He started, then stopped, shaking his head. I need time to process this. Of course you do, I said gently. But while you're processing, I want you to remember something. Biology doesn't make a family. Love makes a family. Choice makes a family. And I chose you every single day. Vanessa was still smiling her cold, triumphant smile. How touching. But this doesn't change anything about the business situation. If anything, it proves that you're not really family at all. I looked at this woman who had used my deepest secret as a weapon, who had tried to destroy the most sacred relationship in my life for the sake of winning an argument about restaurant ownership, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in this entire ordeal. Pity. Vanessa, I said quietly, I forgive you for what you just did, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger toward you would poison my own heart. But I want you to understand something. You may have hurt me deeply, but you haven't destroyed me. Truth has a way of surviving attacks, and love, real love, is stronger than the weapons people use to try to destroy it. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. I'll be taking the weekend to pray and think about what comes next. But on Monday morning, I'll be back, and we will settle this once and for all, not with secrets or manipulation or legal threats, but with truth and dignity, and the kind of love that actually builds families instead of destroying them. I spent that weekend in the kind of prayer and reflection that strips away everything non-essential and leaves only truth. Friday evening, I drove to the Monastery of the Holy Spirit in the foothills outside Fresno, where the Franciscan sisters had opened their retreat center to anyone seeking spiritual guidance during difficult times. Sister Catherine, a woman in her 80s whose eyes held the deep peace of someone who had weathered many storms, welcomed me into a small room with whitewashed walls, a simple wooden cross, and windows that looked out onto gardens tended by generations of faithful hands. "Tell me, child," she said as we sat in chairs worn smooth by countless other souls seeking comfort. "What brings you to us?" I told her everything, not just the recent events, but the deeper story. How I had built my identity around being needed, around sacrificing everything for my family's happiness, around earning love through service rather than receiving it as a gift. I told her about the abandoned baby I had claimed as my own, about the 32 years of love that had been reduced to deception by someone who didn't understand that the deepest truths can't be captured in birth certificates. "I feel like I've lost everything," I concluded, my voice barely a whisper. My restaurant, my son's respect, maybe even my son himself. And I don't know if I was fighting for justice or just my own wounded pride. Sister Catherine was quiet for a long time, her weathered hands folded in prayer position while she considered my words. Finally, she spoke with the gentle authority of someone who had seen countless people wrestle with the difference between God's will and human desire. "Karen, do you know the story of the phoenix?" I nodded, unsure where she was leading. "The phoenix burns completely to ash before it can rise again, more beautiful and powerful than before. Sometimes God allows us to lose everything we think defines us so that we can discover who we really are beneath all the roles and expectations. But what if I was wrong? What if I was acting from selfishness instead of righteousness?" She smiled with infinite compassion. "Child, righteous anger and wounded pride can coexist in the same heart. The question isn't whether you felt hurt. Of course you did. The question is what you choose to do with that hurt. Do you use it to destroy, or do you transform it into something that serves love?" That night, alone in the simple guest room with only a Bible and my rosary for company, I experienced what I can only describe as a spiritual breakthrough. As I knelt on the rough wooden floor, praying the sorrowful mysteries of the rosary, I felt the weight of months of humiliation and betrayal lifting from my shoulders like a physical burden being removed. "Jesus," I whispered into the darkness, "you know what it feels like to be rejected by the people you love most. You know what it feels like to have your gifts despised, your love scorned, your sacrifice forgotten. Help me forgive the way you forgave, not because they deserve it, but because love demands it." In that moment of surrender, I felt something shift in my understanding. This wasn't about winning or losing, about proving I was right or making them admit they were wrong. This was about standing in truth with love, about protecting what was sacred without destroying what was precious. I spent Saturday morning walking the monastery gardens, praying the joyful mysteries while surrounded by roses that bloomed despite the harsh California sun, by vegetables that grew in soil that had been tended with prayer for decades. The sisters who worked there moved with a peaceful efficiency that reminded me of my own hands in the kitchen, purposeful, practiced, infused with something beyond mere labor. At evening prayer, as I sat in the small chapel listening to the sisters chant Vespers, I felt my grandmother's presence so strongly it was almost physical. I could almost hear her voice, speaking the words she used to say when I was a child learning to cook at her side. "Mija, the secret ingredient is never what you put in the pot. The secret ingredient is what you carry in your heart." Sunday morning brought unexpected grace in the form of a phone call. I was sitting in the garden reading from the Book of Ruth, another story of chosen family transcending biological bonds, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jacob's name, and my heart clenched with both hope and fear. "Mom," he said, and the word carried such weight I had to sit down on the nearest bench. "Can we talk? Just you and me?" An hour later, we met at Woodward Park, the same place where I had taught him to ride a bicycle, where we had come for picnics when money was too tight for restaurants, where we had celebrated his high school graduation with homemade tamales and dreams of his bright future. He looked older than his 32 years, worn down by the revelations of the past few days. We sat on a bench overlooking the pond where ducks paddled in lazy circles, and for a while, neither of us spoke. "I've been thinking," he finally said, his voice soft and uncertain, "about what makes someone a parent, about the difference between biology and choice." I waited, my heart pounding, afraid to hope. "I was angry at first," he continued. "Angry that you kept this secret, angry that my whole understanding of myself was built on, well, on what Vanessa called a lie. But then I started remembering things." He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I remember you staying up all night when I had pneumonia, praying over me in Spanish and English, switching between languages like you were calling on every saint in heaven to help. I remember you working 3 jobs to pay for my school clothes, coming home so tired you could barely stand but still helping me with homework. I remember 1,000 small moments when you chose to love me, to sacrifice for me, to put my needs before your own." "Jacob," I whispered, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish, Mom, because yes, you are my mom. Biology didn't make you my mother. Choice did. Love did. 32 years of showing up, of never giving up on me, of believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what made you my mother." The tears came then, hot and healing, washing away months of pain and fear. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner," I managed through my sobs. "I was afraid you might love me less if you knew the truth." "Love you less?" He pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "Mom, finding out that you chose me, that you looked at an abandoned baby and decided to build your entire life around loving him, that doesn't make me love you less. It makes me love you more." We sat there holding each other while the California sun warmed our faces and the ducks continued their lazy circles on the pond. Finally, Jacob pulled back and looked at me with an expression I recognized from his childhood. Determined, slightly stubborn, ready to fight for what was right. "I need to tell you something else," he said. "Vanessa has been pressuring me about the restaurant, about you, about our future. She gave me an ultimatum yesterday." My heart sank. "What kind of ultimatum?" "She said I had to choose. Either I get rid of you completely, fire you, buy out your share, whatever it takes, or she's leaving, taking the baby she's carrying and disappearing from my life." I felt the familiar stab of pain at the thought of losing Jacob again, but this time it was tempered by something stronger, the unshakable knowledge that real love doesn't demand the destruction of other relationships. "Jacob," I said gently, "what did you tell her?" He smiled, and for the first time in months, it was the smile of the boy I had raised, honest, brave, and full of moral clarity. "I told her that anyone who asks me to choose between love and love isn't someone I want to build a life with. I told her that my mother, the woman who chose me and raised me and loved me unconditionally, isn't going anywhere. But the baby deserves better than a mother who uses children as weapons," he said firmly. "And honestly, Mom, after seeing how she treated you, the woman who welcomed her with open arms and taught her everything she knows about cooking, I realized that I don't want to raise a child with someone who has so little capacity for gratitude or respect." That Monday morning, I returned to Ellis Family Kitchen with Jacob beside me and peace in my heart. We arrived early, before the staff, and found Vanessa waiting in the dining room with boxes packed and a lawyer at her side, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in hostile takeovers. "Karen," she said, her voice cold and professional, "I assume Jacob told you about my offer. I'm prepared to buy out your share of the restaurant for fair market value. My attorney has prepared the paperwork." I looked at this woman who had tried to erase me from my own life, who had used my deepest secret as a weapon, who had demanded that my son choose between his wife and his mother, and I felt something I hadn't expected, genuine sadness for her. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "I'm not selling my share of the restaurant. This place is my life's work, my legacy, my gift to the community that has supported me for 38 years. But more than that, it's my son's inheritance, his real inheritance, not the hollow shell you tried to create." She turned to Jacob with desperation in her eyes. "Jacob, you can't seriously be choosing her over me, over our baby, over our future together. Jacob took my hand, his grip steady and sure. I'm not choosing between people, Vanessa. I'm choosing between love that builds up and love that tears down. I'm choosing between the woman who taught me what family really means and someone who tried to destroy that family for her own benefit. You'll regret this, she said, her mask finally slipping completely to reveal the rage underneath. You'll regret choosing a pathetic old woman who never amounted to anything over someone who could have made you successful. I am successful, Jacob said simply. I'm the son of a woman who turned an abandoned baby into a man who knows the difference between right and wrong. I'm the heir to a legacy of love, service, and genuine community connection. That's more success than all your marketing strategies and stolen recipes could ever create. She left that morning, taking her lawyer and her boxes and her threats with her. The staff arrived to find Jacob and me in the kitchen together, preparing for the day the way we had when he was young. Him learning, me teaching, both of us understanding that the real recipe for success had nothing to do with modern techniques or marketing strategies and everything to do with love, made tangible through food. As I tied my apron strings that morning, I felt like the Phoenix sister Catherine had spoken about. Burned down completely and risen again. Not unchanged, but transformed into something stronger and more beautiful than before. I had lost the illusion that love could be earned through endless sacrifice, and I had gained the truth that real love, the kind that creates families and builds legacies, chooses to honor what is sacred, even when that choice requires courage. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated dining room of Ellis Family Kitchen, watching the morning sun stream through windows that had been cleaned until they sparkled like crystal. The walls once again displayed photographs of our family, not just Jacob and me, but pictures of the community we had built over nearly 4 decades. Mrs. Delgado smiling over her special low-sodium meal, the Martinez family celebrating their daughter's quinceañera with a cake I had made from scratch. Generations of customers who had become family, who had returned when they heard that the heart of the restaurant had been restored. The most prominent photograph hung behind the counter. A picture of me and Jacob taken just last week, both of us wearing matching aprons embroidered with Ellis Family Kitchen, where love is the secret ingredient. But it wasn't the only new addition to our walls. Next to our family photos hung a simple wooden plaque that Jacob had commissioned from a local craftsman. It read, "In memory of all the mothers who choose love over biology, sacrifice over self, and truth over comfort. You build families with your hands and your hearts." That plaque had become something of a pilgrimage site. Women from all over Fresno, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, grandmothers raising their children's children, would come not just for the food, but to see those words that honored their often invisible sacrifices. Many of them would sit at table 12, the corner booth I had claimed as my own, and share their stories while I listened and served them meals prepared with the kind of understanding that only comes from walking similar paths. "Abuela Karen!" a small voice called from the kitchen entrance. I turned to see Sophia, Mrs. Delgado's granddaughter, now 9 years old and taller than the last time I had seen her. She ran toward me with the unrestrained joy of a child who knows she is loved and welcomed. "Mija," I said, dropping to my knees to receive her hug. "How is school? Are you still the best reader in your class?" "I'm reading chapter books now," she announced proudly. "And Abuela says you make the best corn cake in all of California, so I brought my friend Maria to try it." Behind her, a shy girl with pigtails peeked around the corner, clearly uncertain about this new place and the grandmother figure who seemed to inspire such enthusiasm in her friend. "Well then," I said, extending my hand to Maria with the same gentleness I had once used to comfort a frightened 3-day-old baby. "We'd better make sure you get extra frosting on that corn cake. First time at Ellis Family Kitchen is always special." As I led the girls to their favorite table by the window, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating morning when I first overheard Vanessa discussing my irrelevance. The restaurant was busier than it had ever been, not because of marketing strategies or social media campaigns, but because word had spread about the place where food was still prepared with genuine love and where every customer was treated like family. Jacob emerged from the office, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly mussed from wrestling with paperwork. At 32, he had grown into the kind of man I had always hoped he would become. Strong enough to stand up for what was right, humble enough to admit when he was wrong, and wise enough to understand that success meant more than profit margins. "Mom," he said, and the word still sent a warm rush through my heart every time I heard it. "The food critic from the Sacramento Bee is here for lunch. Table 8. I glanced over to see a woman in her 50s sitting alone, making notes in a small leather journal while she observed the dining room with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of restaurant from roadside diners to Michelin-starred establishments. "What did you tell her about our story?" I asked, smoothing my apron and checking that my grandmother's silver cross was visible at my throat. "I told her the truth," Jacob said simply. "I told her that this is a restaurant run by a woman who believes that food is love made tangible, and that every dish that comes out of our kitchen carries 38 years of devotion to this community." An hour later, the critic approached the counter where I was preparing fresh salsa for the evening service. She was older than I had initially thought, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had tasted not just thousands of meals, but countless stories of human struggle and triumph. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, her voice warm with genuine interest. "I'm Rebecca Martinez from the Sacramento Bee. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about your restaurant and your philosophy of cooking." "Of course," I said, setting down my knife and giving her my full attention. "But first, let me ask you something. Did you enjoy your meal?" She smiled, and I could see that the question had surprised her. "It was extraordinary. The mole in particular. I've never tasted anything quite like it. There's a depth of flavor that speaks to generations of knowledge. That's because it carries generations of love," I said simply. "My grandmother taught that recipe to my mother, who taught it to me. But the real secret isn't in the ingredients or the technique. The real secret is in understanding that when you feed people, you're not just nourishing their bodies. You're telling them they matter. They're worthy of care. They belong to something larger than themselves." She scribbled notes furiously, then looked up with eyes that seemed to see deeper than surface details. "I understand you've faced some challenges recently, that there was a period when your role here was diminished." I felt Jacob tense beside me, ready to deflect any questions that might cause me pain, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm and faced the question directly. "Yes," I said. "I went through a time when I allowed other people to define my worth, to make me feel invisible in my own life. I forgot that my value doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from God, and from the love I'm able to share with the world." "What changed?" she asked. I thought about that weekend at the monastery, about Sister Catherine's words about the phoenix, about the moment when I stopped praying for endurance and started praying for courage. "I remembered that love isn't supposed to make you smaller," I said. "Real love, whether it's between family members or in a community like this, should make everyone involved grow stronger, more confident, more themselves. When love starts requiring you to disappear, to be ashamed of your gifts, to accept disrespect as normal, that's not love anymore. That's something else wearing love's mask." The critic nodded thoughtfully. "And your son? How does he fit into this story?" Jacob stepped forward, his voice steady and proud. "I fit into this story as the luckiest man in California. I'm the son of a woman who looked at an abandoned baby and decided to build her entire life around loving him. I'm the heir to a legacy of service and genuine community connection that no business school could ever teach." "Abandoned baby?" the critic asked gently. "I was 3 days old when my mother chose me," Jacob said, his arm sliding around my shoulders. "She could have walked away, could have left that responsibility to someone else. Instead, she gave me everything. Her time, her energy, her dreams, her fierce protection. Biology might not have made us family, but choice did. Love did. 32 years of showing up did." That evening, after the last customer had left and we had cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed, Jacob and I sat at table 12 sharing a late dinner of leftovers and planning the next day's specials. It had become our tradition. These quiet moments when the restaurant was ours alone, when we could talk about everything and nothing while surrounded by the comfortable sounds of settling building and distant traffic. "Mom," Jacob said, setting down his fork and looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I have something to tell you. My heart skipped, old fears surfacing despite months of peace. What is it, mijo? I've been thinking about expanding, he said, his voice gaining excitement. Not the restaurant, that's perfect as it is. But the ministry. I want to start a program for single mothers, women who are struggling to make ends meet while raising children alone, cooking classes, but also community support, childcare assistance, job training. I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I understood what he was proposing. You want to help other families like ours. I want to honor what you taught me, he said. That family isn't about biology or conventional structures. It's about choosing to love, to support, to never give up on each other. I want to create a place where women who feel invisible can rediscover their worth. 3 months later, we opened the Ellis Family Community Center in the building next to the restaurant. Our first class had 12 women, some teenage mothers who looked overwhelmed by the responsibility they carried, some older women who had found themselves single after decades of marriage, some grandmothers who had taken in children when their own adult children couldn't care for them. I taught them my grandmother's recipes. But more than that, I taught them what my grandmother had taught me, that their worth wasn't determined by their circumstances, that their love was powerful enough to create families and communities, that they carried within themselves everything they needed to build something beautiful from whatever materials life had given them. The secret ingredient, I would tell each new group as we worked together in the teaching kitchen, our hands busy with masa and vegetables while our hearts shared stories of struggle and hope, is never what you put in the pot. The secret ingredient is what you carry in your heart. Today, as I write this story, Ellis Family Kitchen has been featured in magazines from California to New York, not because of marketing campaigns or stolen recipes, but because people recognize authenticity when they encounter it. The community center serves over 200 families each month, providing not just cooking skills, but genuine community support for women who had felt as invisible as I once did. But the greatest joy comes from moments like this morning, when I arrived at the restaurant to find a young woman waiting by the front door. She was maybe 25, holding a baby who couldn't have been more than a few months old, and her eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. "Are you Mrs. Ellis?" she asked hesitantly. I heard that you help women like me, women who don't have anywhere else to go." I looked at this young mother, this stranger who had heard somehow that our doors were open to people who needed not just food, but hope, and I felt my grandmother's presence as strongly as if she were standing beside me. "Yes, mija," I said, unlocking the door and gesturing for her to come inside where it was warm and safe. "I help women like us, women who know that love is the strongest force in the universe, even when the world tries to tell us we don't matter." As I prepared breakfast for this young mother and her baby, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from invisible kitchen staff to recognized community leader. It hadn't been an easy path, but it had been a necessary one. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think defines us before we can discover who we really are underneath all the roles and expectations. The restaurant is busy now, the community center is thriving, and Jacob is planning to propose to a wonderful woman named Carmen, who shares our values and treats me like the blessing I finally understand myself to be. But none of those external successes matter as much as the internal transformation that made them possible. I am no longer the woman who believed she had to earn love through endless sacrifice. I am no longer the woman who accepted disrespect as normal or allowed others to make her feel invisible. I am Karen Ellis, chosen mother, community builder, woman of faith, who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your God-given dignity. And every morning when I put on my apron and begin preparing food for people I may never see again, but who matter to me anyway, I remember my grandmother's words. "Mija, the secret ingredient is what you carry in your heart." Today, my heart carries gratitude, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that I am exactly where God intended me to be. Have you ever found yourself feeling invisible in your own life, forgotten by the people you've sacrificed for? Have you watched your contributions dismissed while others claimed credit for your work? How did your faith help you find the strength to reclaim your dignity? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this message touched your heart, Please like this video and subscribe to our channel so these stories of hope and transformation can reach someone who needs to hear them today. May God bless everyone who's been through something like this and found the courage to rise again. In Jesus' name, Amen.